The first thing the room heard was the laugh. Then the crack of the rifle against the bench. "You think you'll hit anything with that frame?" The drill instructor barked, loud enough for every recruit on the range to hear. A few of them snickered. One leaned back like he was watching a joke, not a person. Elena Beck didn't answer. She just stepped into the firing lane with her eyes fixed on the steel target 300 yards out, her hands steady, her face unreadable. Then her shirt shifted as she adjusted her stance, and a black snake wrapped around a bullet flashed at the edge of her shoulder blade. The laughter died so fast it almost sounded like a mistake. Colonel Stein, standing behind the line, stopped mid-breath. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He only stared at the mark as if it had risen out of a grave. Elena noticed none of it. She was too busy checking the wind, watching the grass bend, feeling the range, measuring the distance with the quiet patience of someone who had learned long ago that panic wasted lives. "I've shot before," she said softly, not looking up. The instructor scoffed. "Then prove it." He shoved a magazine toward her like he expected her to fail on contact. Elena took it, loaded the rifle, and dropped into position in one smooth motion. Not flashy, not rushed. Exact. The first shot hit center mass with a clean metallic ring that cut through the silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody even moved. Elena stayed downrange for one more breath, not because she was proud, but because she was listening. The second target swayed slightly in the wind. She adjusted by a fraction, fired again, and hit exactly where she meant to. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it made things worse. A recruit at the back muttered, "Lucky." Elena heard him. She didn't turn. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a tiny folded note, and pressed it against the bench before stepping aside. The range officer frowned and picked it up. His expression changed before he could hide it. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the lane layout, marked with tiny corrections no trainee should have noticed, each one precise enough to save a life if the exercise ever turned real. He looked from the paper to Elena, then to the targets, then back again, as if trying to understand how someone the others had mocked had already seen the range better than the people running it. Colonel Stein finally moved. He walked forward, slow and stiff, like every step cost him something. His eyes stayed fixed on the snake tattoo. "Where did you get that mark?" he asked. Elena's jaw tightened. For the first time, her calm cracked just enough to show something buried underneath it. "From a place that doesn't exist anymore," she said. The instructor started to speak, but Stein raised one hand and shut him down without looking away from her. Then Elena's radio, which had been silent all morning, crackled once in her pocket. She froze. The sound was small, almost nothing, but every head on the range turned toward it. A voice came through, distorted and urgent. "Confirm Black Viper status. Immediate response required." Elena closed her eyes for half a second, like she had been trying not to hear that voice for years. When she opened them again, she was no longer looking at the rifle, or the targets, or the recruits staring at her. She was looking past the range, toward something waiting far beyond the wire. And Colonel Stein, for the first time in 20 years, stepped back and said, very quietly, "What happened to the rest of your unit? What happens when the man holding the clipboard realizes the quiet girl in front of him is the one thing his entire base was never meant to see?" Colonel Stein didn't wait for an answer. He turned sharply toward the range tower, where an operator had already lifted a headset and was staring at the radio like it had just spoken in a dead language. "Lock the lanes," Stein snapped. "Now." The order changed everything. Steel doors rolled shut at the far end of the range with a heavy thud, cutting off the easy route to the parking lot. Recruits who had been laughing minutes ago straightened in place, suddenly unsure where to put their hands. Elena looked at the sealed exits, then at the operator in the tower, then at the radio in her pocket as it crackled again, louder this time. No one on the firing line moved, but she did. She reached for the weapon rack, took her rifle, and checked the chamber with one smooth motion, not because she needed to prove anything, but because the sound of the incoming transmission had already told her what kind of day this was becoming. Stein noticed that too. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You recognize that signal?" Elena didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the bench, opened the worn canvas bag she had brought with her, and pulled out a folded strip of black fabric wrapped around an old dog tag. The recruits saw the tag first. Then the silence got deeper. She set both items on the bench like tools, not trophies, and turned back to the range officer. "Clear the lane on the north side," she said, "and keep everyone behind the white line." The officer frowned. "We're in training, not an evacuation." Elena's eyes moved to the tower windows. A second operator had appeared there now, one hand over his headset, his face tense. In the distance, beyond the perimeter fence, a low vibration rolled through the ground. It came first as a hum, then as a rising roar that made the glasses in the observation room tremble. Heads turned. Several recruits stepped toward the fence before a sharp whistle from Stein stopped them cold. Then the shape appeared over the trees, a helicopter, dark against the afternoon sky, moving fast and low. It was not supposed to be here. Not for routine training. Not for a nobody with a rifle and a scar on her wrist. The rotor wash hit the range before anyone could speak, snapping flags hard against their poles and driving dust across the lanes. Elena didn't look surprised. She looked tired. That was worse. The helicopter circled once, then held position outside the fence as if waiting for permission the base had not yet given. Stein stared at the aircraft, then at the radio again, and the color drained from his face. Because whatever had just been activated, it had been triggered by her, and now the whole base had become part of the response. The first person to move was not a soldier. It was the range officer in the tower, one hand still pressed to his headset, the other already reaching for the emergency lock. "Nobody steps past the yellow line," he barked, but his voice cracked on the last word because the helicopter was still circling and the base had already gone quiet around it. Elena's rifle lay across the bench, untouched now, as if she had set down more than metal. A recruit in the front row took one look at the dark aircraft beyond the fence and tried to laugh it off. "What is this, some kind of stunt?" he muttered, but no one answered him. Colonel Stein did not take his eyes off Elena. "You," he said, not loudly, but with the kind of pressure that made the word itself feel like an order. "Step back from the lane." Elena did not argue. She simply reached down, checked the sling, and slid the rifle aside with deliberate care, as if the weapon mattered but not as much as what came next. "I need to confirm the call," Stein said to no one and everyone at once. But before he could move, the range doors at the far end shuddered with another lockdown seal, and a young operations tech rushed in from the control shack, pale and breathless. "Sir, we've got a secondary signal on the radio feed," he said. "It's not the training channel. It's encrypted military." Stein turned. "From where?" The tech swallowed hard and looked at Elena without meaning to. "It came from her lane." That did it. The mocking changed first. The laughter died in pieces, replaced by the stiff, uncomfortable silence of people realizing they had missed something important. Elena's eyes moved once, fast, to the tower, then to the tree line, then back to the bench where a roll of loose tape, a cleaning cloth, and her ammo pouch sat in perfect order. She reached for the pouch, but a sergeant stepped in front of her. "Hold it," he said, trying to recover his authority. "Until we know who you are, you're not touching anything else." Elena stopped, not because she was intimidated, because she was measuring him. In one motion, she opened the pouch, checked the contents, then pulled out a small folded map sheet that had no business being there. She laid it flat on the bench and traced one point with her finger. Stein saw the mark and went still. It was a route line, not for training, for extraction. The helicopter outside shifted lower, and its rotor wash snapped the flags hard enough to make every head turn. Elena picked up the map, folded it once, and handed it to the sergeant instead of Stein. "If they're here," she said quietly, "then we don't have much time." The sergeant looked at the paper, then at her, then back at Stein as if waiting for permission to believe her. Stein took one step closer, his face drawn tight now, all command and suspicion fighting inside the same expression. "Who are they?" he asked. Elena did not answer him directly. She glanced toward the sky, where the helicopter was holding steady like it had been trained to wait for her. Then she said, almost under her breath, "The people who only come when the last team already failed." For the first time, even the ones who had mocked her leaned in instead of back. And then the radio in the tower hissed once, hard and clear, before a voice came through on a channel nobody on that range was supposed to hear. "Confirm visual on Elena Beck. Initiate ground transfer immediately." Stein's hand tightened on the fence rail. The sergeant stared at the map, and Elena, still calm, looked toward the gate as if she already knew what would be coming through it next. The helicopter held its circle over the range, its blades beating the air into a hard metallic pulse when the next problem arrived before anyone had time to breathe. The emergency lock on the north gate had tripped, and the tower officer was already shouting that the outer road was filling with vehicles. Not just one. 3 black SUVs had stopped short of the fence, and more were coming behind them. Colonel Stein moved fast, snapping orders for the recruits to stay clear, but Elena was already walking toward the supply cart, one hand reaching for the field radio with the same calm precision she had shown on the firing line. "We need a landing lane," she said, not to Stein, but to the sergeant beside him. He hesitated for half a second, then did something no one on that range expected. He followed her through without asking for it twice. The competence ripple hit the base at once. 2 recruits ran for cones. Another started clearing the lane markers. The tower officer lowered his voice and repeated her call sign into the headset, as if it had become the only thing holding the situation together. Elena glanced once at the SUVs, then at the helicopter, calculating distance, angle, and timing as if all 3 belonged to the same problem. When the first vehicle door opened at the fence line, Stein reached for the radio to stop whoever was coming through, but Elena caught his wrist before he could speak. "Not hard, just enough. If they're here for me," she said, "then let them land first." It was the kind of choice that cost something. If she was wrong, the whole base would expose itself to a breach. If she was right, she would be the one standing at the center when whoever arrived stepped onto the tarmac. Stein saw it then. She was not protecting herself. She was protecting the range. He let go of the radio and gave the order to open the lane. For one brief moment, the noise shifted. The helicopter dropped lower. The SUVs went still. And in that strange gap, the radio in the tower hissed again, this time with a cleaner signal, a higher clearance, and a voice that made every head turn at once. "Ground team on final approach. Confirm Elena Beck remains on site. Do not let her leave the fence line." No one moved. The recruits looked at Elena. Stein looked at the road. Elena looked at the gate, and for the first time, something in her expression changed. Not fear, not surprise, but recognition. She reached down, took the small paper she had handed the sergeant earlier, unfolded it once, and tucked it into her pocket like a decision she had already made long before she ever came here. Then the first SUV rolled forward, its tinted window lowering just enough for the man inside to speak a name no one on the base had expected to hear. The first black SUV rolled to a stop just beyond the gate, and the man in the front seat did not get out right away. He lowered the window, looked past the guards, past Colonel Stein, and straight at Elena as if the rest of the base had already disappeared. "We were told you might still be here," he said, his voice flat with urgency. Then he opened the door, stepped onto the gravel, and revealed the patch on his shoulder. Not army, not civilian, but an insignia so quietly feared that even Stein's posture changed at once. 2 more vehicles stopped behind him. A second man emerged carrying a slim hard case. The first officer did not ask permission. He handed the case to Stein and said, "She is now the point of contact. Anything related to the incident goes through her." For a moment, nobody moved. Then every set of eyes on the range turned toward Elena, because the rule of the base had just changed around her. Stein took the case, opened it, and stared at the sealed envelope inside. Elena did not reach for it. She only looked at the officer and said, "Who's missing?" The question cut through the noise. The man's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the helicopter circling above, then back toward the north road. "That is what we are here to determine." Before anyone could ask more, the tower radio cracked alive again, and this time the voice was no longer calm. "Perimeter breach on the outer road. Possible hostile approach. Lock down the range." The recruits flinched. The guards shifted their grip. Stein snapped orders to clear the lane, but Elena was already moving, not away from the gate, but toward it, one hand out for the radio. The sergeant hesitated, then gave it to her. She listened for exactly 2 seconds, turned the volume down, and spoke into it with the kind of clipped precision that made the room go still. "Do not send the vehicles to the north road. They are using the convoy as cover. Hold the inner fence. Keep the helicopter high and wide." Stein stared at her. The officer beside him stared too, because Elena had not guessed. She had read the pattern. The radio hissed, then answered with a single word, "Confirmed." That was the first payoff, and it changed everything. The men at the gate immediately shifted their positions. The second SUV pulled back half a car length. One guard ran for the side path. Elena pointed once, and without raising her voice, redirected the entire response before the breach could reach the gate. But the cost came with the next breath. The hard case in Stein's hands clicked open further, and inside, beneath the envelope, was a battered metal tag hanging from a red cord. The same shape as the one Elena kept hidden under her shirt. Stein saw it and went motionless. The officer saw the reaction and looked from one tag to the other. Elena finally reached in, pulled the cord free, and held her own dog tag in plain view for the first time. The two pieces matched, not in name, but in code. The officer's expression shifted. He did not salute. He simply stepped aside and said, "Then you already know what the breach means." Elena's eyes moved to the road again. She understood. The convoy was not the rescue. It was the signal. And whatever was coming next was not after the range. It was for her. The helicopter suddenly dipped lower, its searchlight washing over the outer fence. In that white sweep, a figure appeared near the gate line on foot, moving too fast to be security and too alone to be anyone safe. Stein raised a hand to stop the guards from firing. Elena was already stepping forward, one arm out, claiming the lane before anyone else could take it from her. Then the stranger shouted a name only one person on the base should have known, and Elena froze. Not because she was afraid, because she recognized who had just found her. Elena did not move when the stranger said her name. She only turned her head a few degrees, one hand still resting on the open gate rail, eyes locked on the man approaching from the road, as if the distance between them could still be measured and managed. Colonel Stein saw the shift first. It was not fear. It was control, the kind that came from forcing a body to stay still when every instinct wanted to move. The stranger stopped at the edge of the gravel, breathing hard, his uniform dusty from the ride-in. He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a small weathered case, and when he opened it, the range officer in the tower went silent. Inside was a strip of charred fabric, a bent dog tag ring, and a folded patch that had been stitched and restitched until the edges looked soft with handling. Elena's fingers tightened once on the fence rail. Not enough for anyone to notice except Stein. The man held the case out, but he did not look at Stein. He looked only at her. "We found the ridge marker," he said quietly. "The one you told us never to leave behind." The words hit the base like a dropped shell casing. A few of the younger soldiers exchanged confused looks, but the older ones stopped breathing entirely, because they understood one thing at once. This was not a random visit. This was a trace. A piece of a place that should have stayed buried. Elena stepped forward, took the case, and closed it with a careful hand. She did not open the patch. She did not touch the dog tag. She simply turned the case over, reading the worn corner seam, and for a second her face changed in a way no one had seen before. Not grief exactly, more like recognition sharpened by old pain. The stranger noticed it and lowered his voice. "We did not come here for ceremony," he said. "We came because the trail opened again." Behind him, the first SUV door shut. Another vehicle rolled in behind it. Then another. The line of engines grew longer, heavier, and the base, which had been a place of mockery and noise an hour ago, now felt like a corridor waiting for an order. One of the officers beside Stein stepped in closer, glancing at the case, then at Elena's hands. He did not ask who she was anymore. He asked, "What do you need from us?" That was the first real change. Not respect yet. Something more practical. Something earned under pressure. Elena looked toward the radio tower, where the operator had already begun writing down coordinates by hand because the signal was too unstable to trust. She gave one short nod toward the eastern fence line. "Clear the old access road," she said, "and keep the helicopters off the south field." No one questioned her. 2 guards moved at once. Another pulled a map from the hood of a truck. Stein watched it happen and felt the base reorganize around her without a single formal command. Then the stranger added one more thing, almost as an afterthought, and the whole shape of the moment changed. "There is one more piece," he said, reaching back into the truck. He lifted out a sealed envelope marked with a faded red stripe and held it just high enough for Elena to see the seal. Her jaw tightened. She did not reach for it. Not yet. But the air around her changed anyway, because everyone nearby understood the envelope was not meant for the base. It was meant for her to decide. Elena took one step toward it, then stopped when the helicopter overhead dipped low enough to wash the gravel road in white light. In that glare, the stranger finally looked away from her and toward the tree line. A figure had appeared there, just beyond the fence, motionless and alone, wearing no insignia anyone recognized, holding one hand up as if asking to be seen. Stein squinted, then froze. Because the person at the fence was not a messenger. It was someone from the list no one had expected to survive. Elena did not wait for the second SUV to stop before she moved. She stepped off the gate rail, took the sealed envelope from the stranger's hand, and turned it over once in the white wash of the helicopter light. The man in the tree line was still there, motionless behind the fence, and one of the range officers had already started toward him with 2 soldiers at his back, but Elena lifted her free hand, and they stopped on instinct. She tore the envelope cleanly along the edge, not with haste, but with the same calm precision she had used on every rifle she had touched that day. Inside was a single card, old and weathered, stamped with a designation no one on the base had spoken aloud in years. Colonel Stein saw her thumb brush across the faded mark, and he moved before anyone else could. Hold position, he snapped into the radio, then pointed at the gate. No one crosses until she says so. It was the first time anyone had heard him sound like he was taking orders. Elena did not look up. She walked straight to the fence line, stopped where the gravel ended, and raised the card toward the figure waiting in the dark. The man there answered by lowering his hand and stepping into the light. He was older than the others expected, his uniform plain, his face lined by dust and miles, but the patch on his sleeve carried the same buried signature as the card in Elena's hand. Around the range, conversations died one by one. Stein read the patch, then the card, then the face of the man at the fence, and something in his own posture changed as if a long-locked door had finally opened. The stranger spoke Elena's full call sign without a stumble. "Widow Mark," he said, and this time no one laughed. Elena's jaw tightened once. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out the folded scrap she had kept hidden since part 1, the one with the burned edge and the single handwritten name on it. She held it out, and the man at the fence took it with both hands like it weighed more than paper should. The wind moved through the range. The helicopter banked overhead. Then, without ceremony, the man turned and stepped back, clearing the lane. Stein caught the meaning before anyone else did and lifted his arm. "Open the gate," he said. The soldiers moved, but Elena was already walking forward, not toward the man who had found her, but toward the injured recruit who had been waiting beside the ambulance bay since the first alarm. She set the envelope aside on the hood of a truck, knelt, and checked the boy's bandage with 2 quick, practiced motions. The medic beside him hesitated, then handed her the kit without a word. Elena took it, adjusted the pressure wrap, and secured it with one final pull that left no room for doubt. Only then did she look up. The officers, the range staff, the soldiers at the fence, even the man in the tree line, all watched her choose the casualty over the ceremony. Stein removed his cap. The motion spread. One by one, the men at the gate followed. Elena rose, not to accept applause, but to point 2 soldiers toward the ambulance and one toward the radio. "Get him to Triave," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried farther than the rotor wash. The older man at the fence lowered his head, and for a moment it looked less like a greeting than a promise kept too late. Then his radio crackled. A second message came through, clipped and urgent, asking for Elena Beck by name and requesting immediate transfer off base. She looked at the radio, then at the wounded recruit, then at Stein. He had already understood. This was not the end of anything. It was the first order of the next thing. The radio's crackle had barely faded before the first change in the room came from the people who had laughed the loudest. The recruit who had once smirked at Elena's quiet hands was now already at the ambulance door, pulling it open before anyone asked, his face fixed on the stretcher like it mattered more than his pride ever had. Another soldier jogged toward the radio without being told, one hand still trembling from the weight of what he had seen, while Sergeant Mills stood at the edge of the lane and kept his cap in his hand longer than protocol required. No one spoke above a whisper. The rotor wash rolled over the range in slow waves, and through it Elena moved with the same calm precision she had carried since the first day, checking the patient's pulse, rewrapping the bandage, pressing 2 fingers briefly to the recruit's wrist before she looked up and signaled the medics forward. She did not wait for thanks. She pointed once, and the work continued. The wounded man was lifted into the ambulance with care, not rush, and when one of the soldiers hesitated at the threshold, Elena placed a steady palm against the door frame and guided him through as if she had been doing nothing else all her life. Behind her, the older man at the fence had lowered his head completely now, one hand touching the brim of his own cap before he stepped back from the gate and made room without being asked. It was a small movement, but it changed the whole line of the afternoon. One by one, the men who had stood stiff and uncertain found a place to help. A jacket was handed over. A water bottle appeared. A radio was passed from one hand to another without argument. Even the range officers, who had once watched Elena like she was an interruption, now waited for her nod before they moved anything at all. When the ambulance doors shut, the sound was soft, almost final, and yet no one moved away. Elena turned back toward the fence, where the older man still stood in the fading light, and for a long moment, she only looked at him. Then she crossed the lane, took the folded envelope from her pocket, and placed it in his hand with the same care she had used to secure the wound. He stared at it, then at her, unable to say whatever had been sitting behind his eyes for years. Elena did not give him the chance. She simply closed his fingers over the paper, gave one small nod, and stepped past him. The helicopter above had begun to drift farther out, its sound thinning into the evening air. At the gate, Sergeant Mills finally lowered his cap and set it against his chest. No announcement came. No speech followed. Instead, he turned and opened the gate wider, leaving it that way for everyone behind her. Elena paused only once, at the same place where the mocking had begun, where the first laughter had once rolled over her like heat off concrete. Now the wind moved through that space clean and empty, and the silence there felt different. Not heavy, not fearful, just earned. She looked back at the range one final time, then reached into her pocket and touched the small black patch she had tucked away before the SUVs arrived. This time she did not hide it. She set it gently on the nearest table beside the unused training rifle, aligned it with the barrel, and left it there without a word. When she walked out through the open gate, no one called after her. No one needed to. The soldiers stood aside, the officers stepped back, and the line she had changed with a single choice remained open behind her long after she was gone. Somewhere in the distance, the ambulance lights faded down the road, and the range settled into evening as if it had been holding its breath all day and finally remembered how to exhale. The ambulance lights had already faded beyond the far road when Elena came back to the range office and found the door still half open, the same way she had left it in the rush of sirens and footsteps. Inside, the room had gone quiet again. Not empty, not anymore. Just still. Sergeant Mills was at the counter, not speaking, not watching her in the way he had before, but folding the roster with careful hands and sliding it into a drawer without looking up. The recruit who had laughed the hardest earlier stood near the radio, turned down low now, listening as if he had finally learned the value of not filling every silence. Elena said nothing. She crossed to the shelf, lifted the extra water bottle that had been left out for her without anyone admitting they had done it, and set it beside the others with the same steady motion she used for every task. Then she checked the lock on the supply cabinet, straightened the stack of target sheets, and noticed the small spill of spent casings near the bench. She knelt, gathered them one by one, and dropped them into the metal tray. No one told her to. No one needed to. Outside, the wind moved across the range in a long, low sweep, brushing the flagpole and softening the last of the day's heat. One of the younger soldiers was already out there, resetting the target stand that had been knocked crooked earlier, making sure the next line would be ready before anyone else arrived in the morning. Another carried the patch Elena had left on the table not to a display case, not to a locker, but to the training board beside the schedule, where a thumbtack held it in place at eye level. It was not framed. It was not announced. It simply stayed there, black against the pale wood, beside a handwritten note about safety checks and zero excuses. Elena noticed it when she stepped back into the doorway, and for a brief moment her fingers touched the edge of the frame as if confirming it was real, then fell away. She picked up her worn bag from the chair by the wall, the same bag she had carried in with no one knowing what was inside it, and paused only long enough to glance at the range one last time. The benches were straight. The rifles were locked. The floor had been swept. Quiet work, finished quietly. Behind her, the radio gave a small crackle as someone in the office lowered the volume again instead of letting the static fill the room. At the gate, the same soldier who had once blocked her path now stepped aside without waiting for permission, holding the chain open while she passed. Elena did not look at him long. She just gave a small nod, the kind that asked for nothing and gave everything back. Then she continued down the road at an unhurried pace, one hand resting on the strap of her bag, the other empty at her side. The evening light settled over the base, warm and thin, touching the parked vehicles, the fenced line, the targets in the distance. Somewhere behind her, a voice called for the next detail to come in early tomorrow, and another answered with a simple yes, already moving. Elena did not turn around. She did not need to. The last thing the range held of her was not a speech, not a salute, not a name on a plaque. It was the small black patch on the board, steady in the fading light, while the people who had once watched her in disbelief now worked a little more carefully in the same quiet she had always carried.